Hey, I'm Mike Gilliam, and this is Let It Rip. Life is beginning to return to normal on the COVID front, but we face another grave danger, this one on the political front. It's voter suppression and the efforts by many Republicans to make it harder for Democrats, and particularly people of color, to vote. We're going to tackle the issue with a great panel. Welcome to Let It Rip. Joe Biden is the President of the United States. Kamala Harris is the Vice President of the United States. They won in a fair election, and there's no evidence, I'll say it again, no evidence that widespread voter fraud had anything to do with the outcome. These are facts. But on the heels of a big lie that the election was stolen from the former occupant of the White House, Republicans are all in on making it harder to vote, especially in the battleground states that decided the election. Let's crack open the issue. Here to help us out, we have a professor from Medgar Evers College, which is part of CUNY, Byron Price. The co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign and director of the Kairos Center, Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, is also with us. New York civil rights attorney, Casilda Roper Simpson. And from Atlanta, the founder of the Organize to Mobilize movement, Antonio Lewis. Welcome to all of you. Let's start with you, Antonio. Georgia played a big role in the Biden-Harris win, and almost immediately, state lawmakers took action to make voting harder. They use the words secure and integrity when it comes to elections, but they offer no evidence there was ever a problem with election security. Now, in Atlanta, what are you seeing on the ground?
So securing was dog whistling. It was a message from our governor in his dog whistling ways. Here on the ground in Atlanta, we saw it coming. As you see, our mayor and governor, they were suing each other over opening the state. But what we did see also was that the losers got to make the rules. When I think about what happened on November 4th and on January 7th after the election, is that the governor, who was a part of the losing side, he went back and he changed the rules. We came out and they told us we had the most secure election in the history of Georgia. And then they changed every rule. And the rules that they changed, they were they were so implicit. They were so implicit that it's confusing us on when we can actually go and vote. Like, we know there's Sunday voting, but we don't know when, what Sundays. We know there's a Saturday voting, but we don't know when. The drop boxes, you can only do when you have your vote by mail, or if you want to drop off your ballot, you now have to go inside of the building, and you can only bring it when the building's open. What's the purpose of having a drop box, right?
Right. It certainly is an effort to retain power, even though in the minority. Reverend Theoharis, are you surprised by what's going on with Republicans in relation to voting rights?
Well, I mean, what we've seen over the past decades is that we have an all-out attack on voting rights. You know, we've now gone through 2 presidential elections, this one included, without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act, despite the fact that that people have died fighting for us to have those rights. And so, you know, when they gutted Shelby and gutted the voting, when Shelby helped to gut the Voting Rights Act and that pre-clearance, what we saw all across the country was 27 states enacted voter suppression laws, an all-out attack on this democracy, especially on poor people, on people of color. But it didn't work enough, right? You had in the 2020 election, you had a very strong turnout of Black people, of Indigenous people, of poor people who were voting for candidates that were talking about issues like living wages and addressing systemic racism. You had, high voter turnout, despite the fact that it's harder and harder for people to actually exercise their right to the democratic process. And so it's not surprising. And until Congress reinstates pre-clearance and passes these kind of on a federal level, this voter protection, we're going to see more and more states, using, as they found in the court in North Carolina, surgical racism to try to deny people their constitutionally given rights to elect leaders that represent and that speak and fight for the issues that impact the majority of people. And so it's not surprising, but it's awful. And that's why people are organizing from the bottom up to make sure that we save the soul of this democracy.
Mm-hmm. Byron, the restrictions vary by state, but can include limiting the use of ballot drop boxes, adding identification requirements for voters requesting absentee ballots, and doing away with local laws that allow automatic registration for absentee voting. What do you make of all of that?
Well, to me, it's kind of funny because I think in this election, people of color beat them at their own game, because usually absentee balloting was mostly elderly whites would exercise that. And since they put up so much resistance toward voting, reducing polling booths, sort of like the long lines and so forth. So I think especially in Georgia and a lot of other places, they were very strategic. They said, well, utilize absentee balloting so you could you could bypass a lot of the sort of like barriers that have been put up in place to sort of access the franchise and to vote. So to me, it's not surprising as a Southerner, as someone who sort of looked at voting. When you think about it, even New York, I was surprised to see that quote that you gave. New York has about 12 bills that are looking to restrict voting. So people of color has always been an effort to sort of disenfranchise people of color with respect to voting. So I think the Supreme Court, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead of myself, but when you think about Shelby County and Holder, when they sort of gutted the Voting Rights Act, where these states who are known for discriminating no longer have to have pre-clearance by the federal government before they change laws.
Right, they took that away.
Yes. So yeah, they took that away. Now you have the John Lewis Act that's trying to reinstate that. It passed the House, but it hasn't passed the Senate yet. But I think to your question, Mike, I think it's not surprising to me because the Republicans always do that. And I don't think at any point in time has our country been founded on other people actually getting to participate in democracy and direct democracy. It's mostly, I think, for white males for the most part. And once the system doesn't favor them anymore, then you see all these laws come into place.
Casilda, let me hear from you on this. What do you think about all that?
People are paying attention. And, in a lot of states, we have the felony disenfranchisement. And now that you see that even those individuals who now have the rights to vote after being incarcerated are participating and agreeing with food insecurity. People are realizing that it's a trickle-down effect. And when the voter suppression is occurring, they're speaking to each other and educating and knowledge, and knowing that knowledge and information is power. They're giving each other that information and knowing that they have to stay vigilant. And those long lines, they're still saying, it's very clear that saying that the long lines aren't stopping us from coming out. So understanding that, the targets, the areas and people who are targeted for voter suppression are still coming out and still voting. So people are paying attention and making it very known to the politician and whoever are listening and watching that we're not going to allow our votes to be suppressed.
And just to stay on that, when you think about in Georgia, we learned the rules. We are the only state. There are two states in the country that have that instituted voter ID laws on their own, where the state Secretary of State actually created the voter ID law. The ID law we have in Georgia is where you have to. It's an automatic registration. Let me go back. Only two states in America that have automatic voter registration ID laws. That's Georgia and Colorado. And never has a Southern state wanted to be on a list with Colorado for anything. Colorado is a true purple state. The folks they really vote their pocketbooks and their real thoughts. I was there in 2014, and I saw them reject all the federal candidates and keep the state candidates. And so in Georgia, we have this automatic voter registration where everybody's registered to vote. And you're automatically registered to vote when you get an ID, whether you're a felon, no matter what. So you don't have to do any other research. And so in Georgia, from here on out, it's a get out the vote effort. And I'm okay with that. That means that when we talk about from the grassroots up, from the ground up, the fight's on us. And so if we're going to be moving, the confusion part, which is what I talked about earlier, is that we don't know when the polls are open. And so
let me ask you another question, though, Antonio. Senator Raphael Warnock has called all of this Jim Crow 2.0. Is he right? Is he on the mark?
Yeah. So I talked about dog whistling a little earlier. And when you hear secure the vote in the same state that we have a Republican governor, Republican Secretary of State, and the previous Secretary of State was the current governor who changed all the rules. And so before he battled Stacey Abrams in the election, he changed every voting rule he could. And so we're actually living under his rules. We learned the rules, we learned the game, we beat them at it, and the very next day they changed the rules again. And this country has been built on like the losers framing what happened. And typically, if you lose a battle, you don't get to wake up in the morning and say, hey, this is what happened. You typically have to go with what really happened on paperwork. Right. So typically, our governor, he shouldn't have had the opportunity to change all these laws under the most secure voting election we've ever had in our history.
Reverend, what do you think?
I think right now, the fact that we have these hundreds of bills in 47 states, and especially, as you said, in the states where we had high turnout of poor people and of people of color who put into office, folks that stood for healthcare, stood for, improving education. And so people across this country, whether you're in a state that is really trying to attack voting rights or not, we need vigilance right now, and we need organizing from the bottom up to make sure that this doesn't just happen, and that we act. I mean, this is a fight for our democracy. It's nothing less than that, because if you deny people and you keep people disorganized and unable to put people into office that then pass policies that impact people in a good way and not
get what we just had.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
And we can see the impact of that, right? We can see the more poverty. We can see the public health crisis that we're living through. We can see the fact that folks are in the richest country in the world that throws away more food than it takes to feed everybody, how we have growing food lines, right? And that's a direct impact of the people that are in office and the policies that they pass when they're smuggled basically into office because of voter suppression.
Well, it's not the first time that African Americans have been forced to fight to protect their right to vote. Many have died in the past. Here's a timeline on the struggle African Americans have waged to get and hold voting rights, with a couple of notable events. Back in 1868, white men in Opelousas, Louisiana, killed about 250 mostly Black Americans to suppress Black turnout. In 1873, a mob of about 150 armed white men killed between 60 and 150 Blacks who had taken over a local courthouse, defending it from possible seizure following a controversial election. It indicated the lengths they would go to maintain authority. There was also the Wilmington Massacre, with another 60 or so killed. And what's known as Bloody Sunday in 1965, 600 activists marching from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, to protest for Black voting rights, attacked by state troopers at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, among them the late Congressman John Lewis. So violence, bloodshed, and death, all a part of the struggle for voting rights. Now another attempt to roll it back.